Here's our two stars from Kpler who are going to deconstruct the dark fleet for us right now. What owners, charters, and financiers need to know. Let's get a little more Kid Rock for them just because, we only got a minute. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, fellas. Thanks a lot. Great. You guys can kind of put it together or sit down or whatever. You'll figure it out. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Really nice to be here today. So we come from Kpler. Company is essentially a commodities and maritime intelligence firm. We provide analytics in terms of global commodity and shipping flows for our customers. And today we're here to talk about the shadow fleet or the dark fleet or the ghost fleet. It has many names. And it's all linked to how shipping companies and traders operate in this space in regards to sanctions. So I've got with me today Kevin Kinnee. Kevin Kinnee joins us from the US government. And Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself?
This doesn't work.
Do you want mine?
Yeah. No, just tell them what number we got. Oh, now it's working. Now it's working. No, good morning. My name is Kevin Kinnee. I'm now with Kpler. I spent 25 years prior to this with the U.S. government. I was a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations, and I retired in April, and then I jumped ship and came over to Kpler. So it's been a great week. JC and I've had a couple other presentations, but it's been, it's been fantastic, us going back and forth discussing things like this, and then coming here and meeting all of you. But over the week, we both learned a lot about each other. I learned that JC had no idea about Jimmy Buffett, so that was fun. And I learned that these are not IPAs. So no, but it's. I spent most of my career working narcotics. And I watched the U.S. government, like how we target these transnational criminal organizations, going from like my original. I still remember my first deal. We bought a kilo of cocaine. A bad guy showed up. We bought the cocaine. We showed him this yellow lunchbox. Had $16,000. We did the transaction, moved on. We put that guy in jail. Case ended. If you're a bad guy in the San Francisco area and you saw a yellow cooler full of cash, you were getting arrested. So it was one of those things. We developed and we saw that we got more bang for our buck when we went after the whole organization. And that came from targeting assets, the financial industry, like going after everything that they could do. Once we took their money, once we took their property, once we took the mechanisms they were utilizing to make money and thrive, that's where we started winning as the government. So as a transition, I moved my way up through the chain, and I started supporting investigations where they were looking at sanctions. And it was just amazing to see how the U.S. government has evolved and how we're targeting different things. And like I said, my background was narcotics, but we start to see how that is actually changing, and it's affecting the shipping world as well. We started looking at, I think it was last month in October, OFAC sanctioned La Línea, which is a cartel out of Mexico. And they're not just going after the cartel bringing drugs into the United States or shipping it to Europe. What they're looking at is a full supply chain. Because they're then shipping in containers, they're false manifesting, just whatever you can think of or what you've seen they're doing, and they're bringing that into the ports. So those are the things that the U.S. government started targeting because they realized that these organizations are vast, they're worldwide. So they're going after everything they possibly can. And that is very beneficial to the public safety of the United States. And so I'm happy to be able to come to Kpler and then take my knowledge of my past life and my former colleagues and my contacts, but then put it into play here when I'm talking to you all. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we can help you protect your assets and your investments and things like that. Because at the end of the day, it's about making money. It's about staying safe. It's about national security. It's about having just an overall well-being. So with that, I'll jump into my first slide. Oh, this is a clicker. This looks like a bomb detonator. Nothing's going to blow up. Okay. So as we were discussing, hopefully we can hit some of your questions. So we're going to jump into sanctions on Russia, and these will lead into then JC will deconstruct the dark fleet and really get into some information. But we saw with the invasion of Ukraine that the G7 and the EU started deciding $60 price caps, so for barrel. And what that really did, when we think about it, is it really put a strain on Russia. So when we're looking at this, it also then, they can't, the companies in the G7, as the second point says, they cannot provide services like shipping or insurance or financing for Russian oil unless the oil is priced below the cap. So that's something with Kpler that we monitor, we help with. So those are things that keep you guys in the green. So those are the things we want to make sure that we're protecting and helping you guys with. As we see those regulations go in place, we see the exports by destination, they start to change. We go from China becomes a large player, and so does India. The exports by route, they had, like we discussed earlier, I think the first panel, we started to see different shipping routes. We started to see things because it was easier, or actually made it harder based on the compliance, but then all are the regulations. But then this changes the whole outlook of the world. Like we start to see different ship-to-ship transfers. We start to see the evolution of this dark fleet trying to get around and still keep making money. We're going to then move into Iran because we see the exact same thing happened in 2018 when they pulled out of the Iranian nuclear treaty. And so we're starting to see a lot of sanctions that were placed on Iran. And just as I stated before, it also gets into sanctioning targets, that are entities purchasing Iranian oil, and then the services that are then going to provide and enable this to happen. And to jump back really quick to Russia, one thing JC is going to get into is going to be the Arctic LNG 2 project. And I'm sure everyone here is somewhat familiar or has heard about it maybe. But one thing that the US government did that with the OFAC sanctions, the sanctions never end. They just keep going, and they'll identify something, take it off the list, they'll add it to the list. And one thing that I thought that was brilliant that they did was they started targeting some Chinese vessels that were not the traditional the LNG carriers. They went after the construction fleet, the crews that were going from China. They were going up to help build the facility to really, drive out the production. So it's one of those things where you got to look at it from the folks who own these companies, that they have to be careful of what they're doing, because if you come in from the other side and you're not Russia, or you're not one of these companies trying to build your own pipeline, you then run the risk of associating your business or your company with a sanctioned entity. So that's something that you need to be aware of as you're moving through this process or you're dealing with other companies to really understand the sanctions that go on. All right. And then also, when leaping back to Iran, we have exports by destination and country, and those are changing, they're evolving as sanctions are imposed on Iran, and then by origin installation. The attack on Israel that happened on last month, we see that there was also new sanctions imposed on that on, I think it was October 11th. There was another 24, almost, I think it was 24, it's 24 vessels that were sanctioned based on that action. So it is something that is ongoing, and we're seeing more and more of it. So with that, JC, you want to dive into?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, in terms of, we've talked about oil, we've talked about the Russian sanctions, the Iranian sanctions, but also now very recently on Russian LNG. So on November 2nd, 2023, the US sanctioned the Russian Arctic LNG 2 project. And our LNG analysts at Kpler have been monitoring this installation for a while, because not only does it impact the trade of LNG, but then also all of the services around it, the financing, the shipping, the insurance, and even the logistics services, as Kevin mentioned. So we're seeing this pattern over and over again. It's not just sanctioning the actual commodity from these countries, it's all the services associated with the transport and financing of it. So here's a little timeline that we've been sort of monitoring since the US Department of State hit the Arctic LNG 2 with these sanctions. We noticed that the LNG facility started production in and around December of 2023. We then, through some of our satellite imagery, understood that these LNG tanks were starting to get full, and we had information from our sources on the ground that these facilities were starting to sort of really need to get this LNG off their hands. And then we saw Novatech essentially lowered their production in April of 2024. Some time passed, nothing really happened. There was no activity around the Arctic LNG 2 terminal until this happened, where our platform, which we use various types of machine learning algorithms and our AIS data from our AIS network, noticed this very strange pattern from the Pioneer. And so it immediately highlighted a spoofing event on our platform. And then so we sort of commissioned some satellite imagery from our partners, and we saw this gas flaring event. And then we also noticed a vessel there that you can see on the right image, and that's Pioneer. So Pioneer was essentially manipulating its signal actively. It didn't turn it off, so it didn't sort of trigger any dark activity in that sense, but it created this very strange computer-generated pattern. And so this is the first time for LNG that spoofing has been put in place. And so we've been monitoring this ship and how it's being transporting this sanctioned LNG. For now, it hasn't found a buyer, but it is loitering off the coast of China at the moment. But this is the kind of information intelligence that is extremely important for the industry to sort of have as you're monitoring these activities. More information around the vessel itself. You can see here what we get in terms of our sanctions and risk platform. We look at ownership, we look at classification societies, protection and indemnity club insurance. There was a mention in the audience about crew welfare. All of this is kind of linked to all the different risks and indicators that you can find against particular vessels before you engage in trading and financing them. And so with that and with these sort of implications around sanctions, we've seen this type of activity and this type of behavior dramatically increase. If we look at how sanctioned vessels and companies have evolved through the years, we can see that every time a sanction program is implemented, we have a sharp spike in the number of vessels and companies that then fall under these sanctions treaties. This is also showing in terms of the flag states that are involved in registering these vessels, and we're seeing now a more diverse set of flag registers that are now harboring these so-called gray or dark fleets, as well as the sanctioned fleet. It used to be pretty much just Iran, Russia, and North Korea, but now we have Panama, Liberia, Comoros, Tanzania, Venezuela. They're all sort of adding to the mix, which is making it harder and harder and harder to sort of track and understand which kind of vessels you're dealing with, which owners you're dealing with, and are they registered to a flag registry that has all the right checks and balances in place. And so the way that Kpler defines the shadow fleet, we talk about a vessel that, generally speaking, has loaded some type of sanctioned cargo and fits one of these criteria here in the bullet points. So if the vessel ownership structure is opaque or unknown, if the vessel isn't classified by International Association of Class Society classes, IACS, same for P&I Club, IGP&I, the International Group of P&I. If it's not part of these groups, we highlight that as a potential risk, because these are industry bodies and associations that wish to comply with all the sanction programs. If you're not part of one of these two groups, then most likely there is going to be some more opaque information about your safety of life at sea, for example, certifications, or your insurance for, let's say, oil spillage prevention cover, for example. We also check the age of the vessel. This is a really important factor in all of our data that suggests that any vessel sort of around 20 years and above is most likely going to be engaged in some sort of opaque trade. And then we also link this activity to spoofing and using our satellite imagery to detect any dark activity. So if any of these criteria are met, we will qualify this vessel as part of the shadow fleet. And this is what we've been noticing since January 2022, when we started monitoring these vessels and these criteria. We've seen a sharp increase in this category of vessel. We also note that the oil price cap here in December 2022, since then, there's been a approximately 1,000 more vessels that are falling into this sort of category. And if you're looking at the global commercial fleet, approximately 10% of that fleet is now part of what we call the shadow fleet. So, and then 2% is actually sanctioned. So it is quite a large proportion when trying to look at sort of potential trades and business opportunities. There is a 10% chance you'll be engaging with a vessel that is part of this gray or shadow fleet. And so, yeah, this is just a little plug for our product in terms of the risk and compliance service that we offer. You can check 20 plus different risk indicators to then allow you to decide, traffic light, green light, amber or red in terms of how, if you wish to engage in a trade or a finance for a particular vessel. But in terms of what we're looking at Kpler at the moment in terms of the future outlook, and this is kind of linked to the latest in terms of the US election, here are sort of four sort of main takeaways for us in terms of what we believe will be sort of key points to focus on in the future and around sanctions. So we definitely believe that the US commodity market is going to be a central point for negotiations. The US is in an extremely strong position right now in terms of its exports, and so that could be a big part of its negotiation tactics. For example, for ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. So if the new administration focuses on ending this war, there could be a legitimization of this shadow fleet from Russia, for example, to allow Russia to come back in and use Western services for shipping, sanctions, insurance. So we may see a decline in this shadow fleet if part of the bargaining chip is that Russia is allowed to come back into the oil markets, for example. We may also see a tougher stance on Iran. We've seen in the previous slides how Iranian exports since 2018 have risen under the Biden administration. And we believe that a tougher stance on Iran probably would take maybe 500 to 600,000 barrels a day off the market by the middle of next year. And we may see an increase in sort of AIS spoofing and dark activities in and around Iran if this sort of sanction regime is put in place in a more sort of stronger way and enforced that way. So we may see a shift in the dark activity and the shadow fleet and sort of increased activity there in and around Iran. So yeah, I think we've got about 2 minutes or so left, and just sort of like to open the floor for a Q&A session. Thank you. Yeah.
Is this on? No, now it's on. So, yeah, I'm curious about when somebody turns off their AIS. You mentioned that that the satellite will enable you to find the ship. Are there any other mechanisms besides the satellite for finding a ship if somebody turns off the AIS?
Yeah, several mechanisms. So could be human intelligence, ship spotters, for example, with a camera, shoreside photography. We also have access to radio frequency detection. So these are sort of satellites that detect presence of VHF radio, for example, or radar from the ship, even if it turns off its AIS. So there are other ways apart from satellite imagery. We also have what's called synthetic aperture radar, which is sort of radar from space, where you can kind of detect the presence or absence of a ship. You won't have information about what kind of ship it is and what color it is, but you at least have sort of its position and you know it's there. So yeah, there are multiple ways you can find dark ships.
Basic question. Do sanctions work?
Depends where you're looking. If you look at the Russian export, I think one of the slides there shows that quite well. But Russia hasn't necessarily seen a drop in its exports at all. In fact, all it's done is changed the buyer, the destination, right? We've also seen different trade routes taken. However, for Iran, yes. So 2018, a massive drop in terms of the export, in terms of barrels per day. And as we've seen, it's grown and grown and grown up until 2024 right now under the Biden administration. Will we see that drop come back under Trump? Who knows? But we believe that sort of if certain policies are put in place, 500 to 600 barrels a day 1,000 barrels a day will come off the Iranian export trade.
And one technical question, it's Carlene again. I'm also a Maritime Accelerator for Resilience, which is on maritime security. You mentioned in your slide that there are flags that are being utilized for that fleet. And I wasn't surprised about Iran, wasn't surprised about Russia or North Korea. I was surprised to see you reference Panama and Liberia.
Yeah.
Because those regimes are considered good regimes. What is your action, or what is the action taken once those registries are involved?
It's a really good question. And we are seeing flags take action. However, if it's a negotiation process with the vessel owner. So they have usually long-term contracts with vessel owners in terms of the registration of their vessels. Depending on how these flag states and flag registries are set up and the sort of rules and regulations that they follow, it's more of a commercial conversation that they need to have. Either they work with the vessel owner to get off these sanction lists or the shadow fleet and make sort of step-by-step processes to improve their operations at sea, making sure they have all the right certificates, making sure they pass all their port state control inspections. But some flag registries, we've reached out to a few and have asked them, when are you going to take this vessel off your registry? And they come back to us in writing and say, this is in conversation right now with the vessel owner. So it does take some time. There are some wind down periods for these certifications. Same for insurance contracts. You have clauses in there that stipulate that if you are engaged in certain sanctioned activity, you will have your insurance cover revoked. But there are some periods of time to allow you to make amends. But if you don't within that time period, then you must come off that insurance or that flag registry. So it all depends. Each registry insurance company has different time frames for which they implement these rejections.
Thank you.
Yes, question in the back.
I think that's the last one.
Okay.
Do we have one right
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name's Harry Theochari. I'm the chairman of an organisation called Maritime London that works very closely with the British government. And we discuss these issues at great length. Can I just ask you, and it's a very unfair question I'm about to ask you, but what difference does it make? You do all these calculations, you do all this information gathering. There are upwards of 650 to 800 ships trading perfectly legally around the world if you take away sanctions. They go to India, they go to China, they have their own universe of lawyers, accountants, classification societies, flags. They do everything that any other ship can do. And how many vessels have actually had any action taken against them? We through Maritime London watch this very carefully, and it's totally toothless. Nobody really cares. We're not doing the job. So I just wonder how helpful all of this really is, because you can see from the trading patterns of these vessels that they don't go anywhere within the ambit of US or EU sanctions enforcement capability.
Yeah, it is definitely, when you look at the sanction regimes that are put in place, it is really to stop utilizing G7 services, insurance, finance, shipping. And what that does is it cuts you off from a portion of the market. It may also mean that you're not able to be sort of ship-to-ship transferring, for example, and you have to do longer ton-mile journeys. You're spending more fuel. It is impacting sort of their balance sheet, essentially, their profitability. That is the whole point of these sanctions. Now, we track these vessels for our customers who wish to avoid any type of engagement with the shadow or the sanctioned fleet, which includes ship-to-ship transfers, which includes understanding, for example, falsification of certificates of origin. We have information about the cargo, not just about the vessel position. So if they get a certificate of origin that says a particular country, and in fact it's from Russia, for example, we can show that. So they're sort of using it as a due diligence tool rather than, making sure that the U.S. government or the European Union board these vessels, for example, and freeze assets. It's more about ensuring that companies, especially in the G7, do not touch these trades. So it's risk averse. It's more so about being risk averse as well, and protecting financial assets. I don't know. Maybe Kevin, you want to add a point around that?
And then maybe 30 seconds if there's anything to add, or you can meet at the break. Okay,
We can take it up later. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
if you could join me in thanking